Okay. Yeah. Okay. This week is Parshas Teruma, and I'll try to speak about Parshas Teruma, but also perhaps I'll speak about the Mitzvah also, and because starting next week, we'll probably get onto topics focusing on Purim and Schiras Amalek and many things along those type of topics, in view of the fact that Purim is coming up. Now, in this week's Sedra, the Torah describes the requests from maybe not the requests, the mitzvah of constructing the Mishkan, and not only construction of the Mishkan, not only the construction of the Mishkan, but the Torah is also gives a detailed explanation in most of the Kalim, how the Kalim, the utensils in the base of Midrash were to be used, the menorah, the Mizbeach, the altar, and etc. Now, regarding three of the utensils of the Mishkan, of the tabernacle and of the temple, the Torah tells us that they should have a zer zohav, a golden crown around it. Well, first and most important, of course, is the Aron, the ark that contained the Luchos Habris, that contained the tablets of the Ten Commandments. So that had to have a golden crown around the top of it. And then also the shulchan, the table, which contained on it the lechem apanim, the loaves of bread that were placed every week and remained for a week in the Beis Hamikdash. So the shulchan also had a crown around it. And then later on, not this week's Sedra, the Torah tells us about the Mizbeach, the Mizbeach Hazav, which was used for the Torah, for the burning of the incense, that also needed a crown above it. Now, crown is a symbol of special distinction. So the placing of the crown is symbolic of the special distinction that of special distinction in regard to the Mishkan, in regard to the Beis Hamikdash, in regard to the utensils being in the Beis Hamikdash. Now, there's a very interesting Midrash Rabbi. The Midrash Rabbi says that the word zer, a crown, which has a tzere, two dots, one next to the other, underneath the zayin, zer, could also be read, because in the Torah, there are no nekudos, no vowel signs that are attached to the letters. So a person could mistakenly read the word zer, which means a crown, as zor, as foreign. A foreigner is called a zor. If a non-Kohen goes into the Beis Hamikdash and performs the service as if he was a Kohen, he is a zor, he is a foreigner. So the word zer, the expression is a very interesting expression. The expression is when you look at the word, because there are no nakudos, no vowel signs attached to it, you can read it zor as foreign. But when you read it in accordance with the mesora, in accordance with the tradition that was handed down, you read it as zer, which means a crown. Now we have to understand, what is the idea behind this concept, this comment of the Midrash Rabbi? Now it's very interesting and also has to do with crowns. The Torah tells us that because the Jewish people said in last week's Sedra, Naaseh Venishma, we will do and we will listen, or we will do and we will hearken, or we will do, the word nishma could be interpreted in many different ways. We will do and we understand. Naaseh Venishma, but the simple translation is Naaseh, I will do and I will listen. Now, so because the Jewish people mentioned Naaseh, we will do, when they committed themselves at Sinai, to accept the Torah, to perpetuate the Torah, and to give over the Torah to future generations. So because of that, when they said Naaseh before Nishma, we will do and we will listen, and they said we will do before they said we will listen, so 600,000 angels, figuratively, came down from heaven and placed two crowns on each of the Jewish people, one corresponding Naaseh, we will do, and the other corresponding Venishma, and we will listen. And the Beis Halevi points out that it wasn't just because they mentioned both words, Naaseh and Nishma, that they merited to get two crowns. But the reason they merited to get two crowns was because they placed the word Naaseh, I will do, before the word Nishma, and I will listen. And the question is, what is the significance of that? Now, the Beis Halevi suggests the pshat. The Beis Halevi suggestion was, if we would have said, he understood Nishma to have reference to the mitzvah of Talmud Torah, to the learning of Torah. So he said, now, there could be two approaches to learning Torah. You can learn Torah simply to know what you have to do, as an instruction book. And the Torah certainly gives us guidance and instructs us how to act. But the mitzvah of Talmud Torah, the mitzvah of learning Torah, is more than just that. The learning of Torah is an end in itself. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that a person should study Torah as history, although history could be obtained from the Torah. It doesn't mean that a person should study Torah as a form of sociology to understand ancient nations. But it means Torah for the sake of Torah. Torah because it was given to learn Torah, because it was given at Har Sinai. Torah in order to perpetuate the mesora, even if it has to do with things that doesn't have to do with our actions. Today there are no qurbanos, there are no sacrifices. But nevertheless, the learning the halachas of kachim, the learning the halachas of sacrifices, the learning the halachas of the avodah is a mitzvah of Talmud Torah. So if it had said, if the Jewish people had said, Nishma, we will listen and we will do, so it would seem that the Jews were committing themselves to the learning of Torah only for direction in how to act. Now, there's no question that we have to receive direction from the Torah, and we have to lumon on the nas lasos. But Torah that is coupled with devotion to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that is coupled with commitment to mitzvos, is an end in itself, is a mitzvah in itself. So that's how the Beis Halevi explains. Why did they get two crowns? One crown because it wasn't just that they said the word Naaseh and the word Nishma, but because they got a special crown for Talmud Torah, because Talmud Torah was to be understood as something that is an end in itself. It wasn't just an instruction book. However, my uncle, I read many years ago in one of the books that wrote over some of my uncle's shiurim and machshava in Jewish thought. He suggested another thought that, if I recall correctly, he based it on something that the Tanya says. He said there is, and to the best, I'm saying it over to the best of my memory, and whether my uncle meant that or something else, but this is the way I understood it. And this could be applied, as I think my uncle did, to the Naaseh Venishma. My uncle, I think, said that according to the Tanya, there is what's called Das Elyon and Das Tachton. Das Elyon is the higher understanding, and Das Tachton, or higher logic, Das Tachton is a lower logic, lower understanding. Now, now the way I would understand it is, it really represents a higher attitude and a lower attitude. What do we mean by higher attitude and lower attitude? Those are my words, not my uncle's words. In other words, there is the true person, the person inside, the instinctive act that a person does. What a person does sometimes without thinking is more telling about his attitudes than what he does when he thinks things over. So the Das Elyon, as I recall, is the idea of the inner person with whose actions, his disposition, his automatic disposition, whereas Das Tachton is what he decides to do or what he does when he thinks things over. And Naaseh, if you say Nishma, if you would put Nishma, I will hear and I will do. So that implies, let me hear what it is. Let me evaluate it. Let me study it. And then I will do it. And then I will be committed to mitzvahs. And I will be committed to all the mitzvahs. But it'll be based on an evaluation. But on a higher level is the commitment, the automatic commitment. Because that's indicative who the person truly is. To a certain degree, a person could suggest that the Das Elyon is somewhat identified, of course, not exactly the same thing, but could be somewhat identified with the unconscious of the person, where the Das Tachton could be identified with the consciousness, what he does consciously, not necessarily instinctively. So I know they used to say in yeshiva that if somebody was very drunk on Purim, he shouldn't be very drunk even on Purim, but if somebody was very drunk on Purim and he took another cup of wine, whatever, and he made the bracha, bar priya gofen. That was so, and he was acting while not being in control of himself. That told us something about his inside. If a person makes a bracha, bar priya gofen, when he's not drunk, so then it just tells us of what he decided to do. So the Jewish people, when they accepted the Torah, they didn't just accept the Torah on the basis of that we will do it because we will feel that that's the right way to act. No, we will do it because we are committed to it. That is who we are. It's not just what we will do, but that is who we are. So that was the Naaseh Venishma. The Naaseh before the Nishma was indicative of the fact that we're not only committing our evaluation process, our thinking process to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but our very being, we are giving over to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And even where I cannot evaluate consciously, that also is given over to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Because instinctively, I have programmed myself to do what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants. So so that's the significance of Naaseh Venishma. And it's because the Jewish people said Naaseh Venishma, they obtained 2 crowns for Naaseh Venishma. So the crowns are indicative. The giving of the crowns, which is symbolic of position by heaven, is where a person that gives not only what he will do, but he gives himself over to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And in a sense, we speak of avoda. What is avoda? We are in the service of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We give ourselves over to him. It's not only that we choose to do these things. So this is what, so in a sense, there are people who service the HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The people who service the HaKadosh Baruch Hu is from the inside out. When they do something, it's because the inside, it emanates from the inside. But there are people, and I think that today, most of us, and I'm including myself in that, we work from the outside in. We act, and hopefully that will have an impact on our inside. The Rambam talks about two types of tzaddikim. One tzaddik is the chassid ha'ma'ula, the one who is just naturally disposed to do what's right. And then you have people who he calls are the Moshe Barucho, that they are in control of themselves. And in regard, the Ram discusses which is greater. But if you want to know my impression, my feeling is that this was the difference between European Jews. When I'm talking about European Jews, I'm not talking about the Jews living today in France or Britain or even Switzerland. But I'm talking about the Jews certainly prior to World War I, before certain influences penetrated the Jewish communities. And they weren't all Talmidei Chachamim. And I don't know if you had all the shiurim that we have today. I don't know if they had all the chumras that are pushed today. And some might be valid chumras. Most of them probably not.
When you say shiurim they have today, you mean like the amount of matzah you have to eat?
No. Shiurim of Torah. Today you turn on your Zoom. You get a share. Today, people attend all kinds of shiurim. I mean, I don't think that in Europe you had as many Jews learning Daf Yomi like you have learning today. But the Jew of Europe, it started from the inside coming out. And for the Jews of America, it's from the outside coming in. So, and in a sense, so I think but both are good. Both are good. And it's very interesting, the Torah tells us, but the ultimate significance is that it should be both on the inside and on the outside. It should be both on the inside and on the outside. Of course, from a certain perspective, from the inside coming out is in a higher level than from the outside coming in. But nevertheless, that's a very big madrega in itself, from the outside coming in. And the Chazal tell us, the Torah tells us about the luchos, about the tablets which had the Aseres HaDibros, the Torah, on them. Choros hala luchos. It was engraven on the luchos. What's the difference between, I think the Baal HaTanya and the Likutei Torah points it out, What's the difference between the engraven script and the script of writing? Writing is only on the surface, but engraven script, that comes part and parcel of the stone itself. It's not just on the surface. It goes through the whole stone in itself. And the experience of Naaseh Venishma, in a sense, was the experience of Naaseh Venishma was not only that I will do, but my inside will be committed also. At least eventually it will be committed. So, and in a sense, I discussed it many times. The purpose of the Mishkan, was to perpetuate the Sinai experience. And we know about the two human figures, or angelic figures, as the Rambam says, by the Aron, that when they faced each other, there seems to be a contradiction in the Torah about when they faced each other with the Kruvim, when they faced each other. So as the pasuk says, when the Mishkan was made, they faced each other. But in Yoel it said, "Upneihem nishal abayis," their faces were turned away from each other and faced the walls of the Beis Hamikdash. And the Gemara mentions a machlokas, Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Shlokish. How do we resolve this contradiction? And one answer is kanos in ritzono shel makom, kanenos in ritzono shel makom. When the Jewish people were doing the will of God, so the two angelic figures faced each other. But when the Jewish people were not doing the will of God, the two angelic figures were facing the walls of the Beis Hamikdash. Seems very odd that facing the walls of the Beis Hamikdash should be a sign of enos and ritzono shel makom, not doing the will of God. How we to understand it? But when we say that the Mishkan was perpetuating Matan Torah, it wasn't only perpetuating what HaKadosh Baruch Hu did at Matan Torah, in the giving of the Torah, as demonstrated by the Aron and the Luchos. And it was, and the giving of the oral Torah by virtue of the Sanhedrin, who acts in place of Moshe Rabbeinu in giving over the Torah of HaKadosh Baruch Hu to Klal Yisrael. But it's also it's a perpetuation of Matan Torah, of what the Jewish people did in Matan Torah, how they merited to receive the Torah. And how did the Jewish people merit to receive the Torah? When they were ke'ish echad b'leiv echad, when they were like one person with one heart. When the Jewish people, when they said Naaseh Venishma, they were on the level of malachim, of angels, perhaps higher than the level of angels. When they faced each other, and the Midrash talks about not only facing each other, but almost coming close to each other. So when they faced each other, so it was ki'ish echad b'leiv echad, like one man with one heart. But when they faced the walls, it wasn't ki'ish echad b'leiv echad. Osin ritzono shel makom. So the symbol is that you are perpetuating the Matan Torah in your daily lives. But if it's enos and ritzono shel makom, you are not perpetuating Matan Torah in your daily lives. Pneim mishal bayis. You might be very religious, very frum, and all that, but it's enos and ritzono shel makom. If it's not ki'ish echad b'leiv echad. And in a sense, I want to suggest that that's the idea of the luchos also. The idea of the luchos is that the commitment is not just on the surface. The commitment is internal. It's not only I do what the Torah says, but the Torah becomes part of me. And we say very often that when we finish a Masechta, we make a siyum. Don't separate me from the Torah. Don't separate the Torah from me. Don't take this Masechta away from me. And don't take me away from the Torah. The Jew has to become part of the Torah, and the Torah has to become part of the Jew. And in other words, the emphasis is on the internal. And there are those, again, who are like the Chassid Amula, and there are those that's the other way. It's interesting. My uncle, my father, very often would explain certain halachas almost the same way, but at the same time, it was altogether different. I'll give an example. The mitzvah of avelus, of mourning, has a double component. There are acts of avelus. We don't wear shoes. We don't wash ourselves. In ancient times, they would turn over their beds. We don't do that today. There are extraneous acts of mourning. And of course, there's aninus b'leiv. There is feelings of sadness of heart. One does not fulfill the mitzvah of avelus if he's joyful in his heart and he sits shiva outwardly. There's a double aspect to avelus. And the same thing is true about Simchas Yontif. Simchas Yontif, there's a mitzvah of basar v'yayin, of eating meat and drinking wine. But if one is mournful in his heart, he does not fulfill the mitzvah of Simchas Yontif. And my uncle understood that in this manner, that we have to control the way we act. The halacha requires us to do certain things or not to do certain things in order to promote certain feelings and emotions in the heart. It's the external that it's the external that has to have an impact on the internal feelings. My father, on the other hand, said that Avelus mourning and Simchas Yontif, on the other hand, on the contrary, you have to make what my father would call an external manifestation of the internal feelings. The basar v'yayin, the meat and wine that you eat and drink on Yom Tov, has to be demonstrative of what you're feeling, of the joy that you're feeling in your heart. And the acts of mourning has to be demonstrative of the feelings of mourning that you have in your heart. And a person could argue that actually both are correct. But I'm just giving this as an example. But both have to do with the feelings of the heart. The internal Jew and the external acts. And there is a connection between the two. So the Torah that's engraven, that's indicative of the fact that the Torah that's written on the Jew, and the Jew is one. It's not something that's just on the surface. Yes, there are mitzvahs that we have to do, but it all comes from the internal commitment. And when it doesn't come from the internal commitment, we do the mitzvahs in such a way that it should cause us to have an internal commitment. And I think there's the Rambam in Hilchos Tefillin, I've mentioned it just recently, a matter of fact. The Rambam says about the importance of wearing tefillin, that when a person wears tefillin, so he's a Yerushalayim, he's a Nanav, he focuses on only what's important, what's true, on fear of God. What's the idea behind it? And I mention always the story of the Vilna Gaon, that the Vilna Gaon was once taken prisoner. Matter of fact, I mentioned that they, since Russia opened up, might be closing down again, I don't know. But since Russia opened up, they looked at the prison records in Vilna, and one of the prisoners at that time was Rabbi Eliyahu Chassid. The Vilna Gaon was called Rabbi Eliyahu Chassid. They probably asked somebody, what's this person? Who is this person? And they said Rabbi Eliyahu Chassid. So the secretary, whoever at the prison, wrote Rabbi Eliyahu Chassid. Okay, so they came to for whatever the issue was, they came to question the Vilna Gaon. And when they came in, the Vilna Gaon was wearing Talus and tefillin. And the person who came to question him got so scared, he ran out. Another prisoner asked the Vilna Gaon, why is it? How is it that he ran out? So the Vilna Gaon says, it's explicit Gemara. The Gemara says, "V'ro kol amei haaretz, all the nations of the world will see, ki shem Hashem nikra elecha, that the name of God is called upon you. V'yaru mimeka, they will be scared of you." Amar Rabbi Elazar Gadol, the Gemara in Brachas, the Gemara Menachos says, "El tefillin shabarosh." That's the tefillin of the head. And he came in and I was wearing the tefillin shabarosh. So he got scared and he ran away. So that prisoner thought, well, I'll do the same thing when they come to interrogate me. And he dressed in Talus and tefillin, a very frum look. And they came in and they beat him up. And he asked the Vilna Gaon, how is it with you? They ran away. And with me, they beat me up. So the Vilna Gaon says, it doesn't say, Elu tefillin sha'al harosh. These are the tefillin on top of the head. But Elu tefillin shebarosh, it's in the rosh. The mitzvah of tefillin is connected with the inside of the person. The Parshas of Yetzias Mitzrayim, the Parshas of Kabbalos HaMalchus Shemayim, remembering what God did for us in the past and the commitment that we gave to God. That's not just in the tefillin, but that's part of us as well. So this is so in other words, what's important by mitzvos is that the mitzvah shouldn't be just external. There has to be a connection between the external and the internal, whether it's the external coming from the internal or the external influencing the internal. But there has to be a connection between the external and the internal. If it's just the external, it's just a costume. It's just fake. And I think that perhaps is what the Midrash means when the Midrash says Zer and Zor. In other words, you can go to a costume party and you can put on a crown and you can put on royal robes, a costume of royal robes, but that doesn't make you a king. That's fraudulent. Haman, when Achashverosh said, what should I do for somebody who did on behalf of the king? And Haman thought, who would the king want to honor more than me? So what did Haman say? He said, put royal robes on him, put the crown on him. Because Haman understood that Malchus kingship manifests itself in wearing royal robes. But the Torah says the crown is status. When it comes to the base of Mikdash, we have to understand, and you have to understand why. What's the idea behind it? What was the purpose of the base of Mikdash? What was the purpose of the Mishkan? All the Rishonim, the Rambam, the Chinuch, they talk about man, because of his very nature, had to be impressed with Avodas Hashem, with the service of God. But in a certain sense, that represented a challenge. Because when we come into the base of Mikdash, when we see the Kohanim with their uniforms, and all that was necessary, according to many of those who give tamim to the mitzvos, all that was necessary in order to cause an impact on man's thinking, to be overwhelmed with religiosity. But the challenge is that shouldn't remain something just of the outside. It shouldn't be something that's just external. It has to be connected internally to the person. So because of that, that's what the Midrash means. The Midrash means to emphasize the crowns that are demonstrative of status, of special status. It can't be Zor. It can't be something foreign. It has to be Zer. It has to be a real crown. A costume is something foreign. A uniform is what it really is. We have to differentiate between uniform and costume. And yes, in the Beis HaMikdash, there was Bigdei Kahuna, There was all kinds of things that impress a person when he looks. But on the basis of looking alone, so it could be zor, it could be something foreign. But if we understand what it is on the basis of the mesora, the way we pronounce the words in the Torah, there are no vowel sounds in the Torah. It's all based on something that's written in. It's all based on what's given over from generation to generation. If we understand what's important from generation to generation, if we remember the former generations about their devotion to Torah, their devotion to God, their devotion to the Jewish people, then it's not Zohar, then it's there, then it's a crown, then it's a uniform. So this is the idea why in the Midrash Rabbi. And it's interesting that in Parshas Tetzaveh, the Torah talks about the big day kahuna, the clothes of the Kohen, and of the Kohen Gadol in particular. And one of the clothes of the Kohen Gadol was the tzitz. The tzitz was a gold plate that was on the forehead of the Kohen Gadol and was attached to his ears by extension. And on it was inscribed the word Kodesh LaHashem, holy to God. And it's very interesting that when the Gemara tells us, well, there is a machlokus, there's an argument in the Gemara, whether the Kodesh LaHashem was written on one line or no. The LaHashem had to be on top and the Kodesh had to be at the bottom. Now, it looks strange. And the Gemara, the Rambam paskins, because based on what the Gemara said, that they saw in Rome, in the treasury room of Rome, some of the articles of the Beis HaMikdash that the Romans seized during the second qurban. And they found that gold headplate, or whatever you want to call it, the tzitz. And on it, Kodesh LaHashem was written in one line. And the opinion of the Chachamim was there was two separate lines, God's name on top and Kodesh at the bottom. So first of all, somewhat difficult because it's code, and some say it was Kodesh La at the bottom and Hashem, God's name on top. So you have God's name and Kodesh La. It doesn't even make sense when you look at it. How are we to understand it? But it all depends how you look at the Kohen. If you look at the Kohen going from down up, so then it makes sense. It's Kodesh La. And then as you go look further up is Hashem, is God's name. But if you look from the top down, then it doesn't make sense. Now the Rambam says that the halach is, under ideal circumstances, it should say Kodesh, on top, and LaHashem on top, and Kodesh La at the bottom. But he says there were times when they had it all in one line. So the question is, if we paskin that it should be in two separate lines, how is it possible that there were times that it was on one line? If I'm doing something, I can make a mistake for myself. But if they were making something for the Kohen Gadol, for the Jewish people, it was certainly supervised. How could we assume that there were times that they actually made a mistake? But I think it depends when. There were times when, what did a person see first? What inspired the looker? Was it the face of the Kohen Gadol? And you looked at his face, and then you looked up. You saw holiness in the face of the Kohen Gadol. And then you looked up at the tzitz. So it's Kodesh La, holy too, and above that, Hashem, God. But there were generations, especially toward the end of the second base of Mikdash, that the holiness of the Kohen Gadol was not what inspired the person, but it was the position of the Kohen Gadol. And you find people that their position makes them great. It's very interesting. The Torah in Bahaloska, it talks there about the qurbanos, the sacrifices that were given by the Nisim. So each day another Nasi gave a sacrifice at the dedication of the Mishkan, at the dedication of the altar of the Mishkan. And on the first day, the Nasi, the prince of Shevet Yehuda, gave the korban, gave the sacrifice. And the Torah says, "Vayihi hamakriv b'yom harishon Nachshon ben Aminadav lamata Yehuda." It was Nachshon, the son of Aminadav, to the tribe of Yehuda. It doesn't say Nasi. He was the Nasi. He was the prince of Shevet Yehuda. But in talking about him, Torah doesn't tell us he was the Nasi. Lamata Yehuda. And the second day, Vayihi hamakriv Nachshon ben Nachshon ben Aminadav. B'yom hasheni hikrib Nisanel ben Sur Nasi Yisachar. The second day, Nisanel ben Sur, who was the prince of Shevet Yehuda, he gave the korban. And on the third day, B'yom hashlishi Nasi Livnei Zvulun, the prince of Shevet Zvulun, gave it. Eliah ben Chelon. What's the idea? The idea is there are certain people that they are so great that the position they occupy is almost, secondary would be a different word. Nachshon ben Aminadav, he was the Nasi, but his greatness did not emanate from his position. His greatness emanated from himself. And then in the second day, Nisanel ben Sur, so his name is mentioned first. And then he was Nasi L'Yisachar. He gave honor to his position. He gave honor to his position. The third day, it was Nasi Livnei Zvulun, the prince of Zvulun, who? Eliah ben Chelon. The position gave honor to him. If the Kohen Gadol, and they could all have been great people, but there are people that are so great. The Chavetz Chaim, he didn't occupy any positions. He owned a store. And there are people who are great people that have positions and they give honor to their position. And there are people, leaders, who because of their position, they became great. So in the generation where Kohen Gadol, where you saw the face of the Kohen Gadol, and the Kohen Gadol was great, so it wasn't the position, the clothes represent the position, but it wasn't the clothes that gave greatness, that inspired. It was the Kohen's face, the Kohen's being that inspired. So what hit you first, the Dusha that you recognized first was in him. And then you looked up. So the Kodesh La was at the bottom, holy too, and God's name was on top. But there were generations where it was the position that gave greatness to the Kohen Gadol. And there it was in one line. You look down. First you looked up, and you saw the gold plate that says Kodesh LaHashem. And then you look down, it was the position of the Kahuna that gave greatness to the Kohen Gadol. It all depends which generation we're in, who the leaders of that generation are. And it's very interesting. The Torah tells us in the Chumash Dvarim, Rashi mentions that Moshe Rabbeinu said to Klal Yisrael, give me people who will serve as judges for you. So he says, I don't know who they are. When I see them, they're mu'utav the Talus. They're covered with a Talus. I don't know who they are. You know them. You tell me who these people are. Just putting on a Talus by itself sometimes could hide the person. So the person, Moshe Rabbeinu said, I don't know these people. You have to tell me who they really are. Judges in those days wore talesim, and if it was muta talus, they were hidden. He didn't know who they were. It's important. It's important that the externals not be just externals. There has to be externals that come together with internals. Now, in a matter of fact, and especially in the Beis HaMikdash, with the purpose of the Beis HaMikdash to a large degree was to do the avoda, to do the service. And I always mention the Alshich says, why was it that the carbon of Cain was rejected and the carbon of Hevel was accepted? The Hevel Hevi Gamhu made Chorosono. Hevel, so he interprets it not in the literal sense, but Hevel Hevi Gamhu, together with his external carbon, with his external sacrifice, Hevi Gamhu, he brought himself. He gave himself over. Cain gave Cain gave from the agriculture that he grew, from the flax that he grew. He didn't give himself over. And the Beis HaMikdash is a place of avodah. It's a place of service to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So there has to be a special emphasis in the Beis HaMikdash, that in the Beis HaMikdash, it's not enough. It's not enough to give the external sacrifice. In the Beis HaMikdash and in the Mishkan, we have to give, as the first pasuk in Vayikra says, and as the Baal Tanya emphasizes in Likutei Torah, Adam ki yakriv mikem carbon lashem. It's not enough that the carbon comes from the zone, from the flax, from whatever, but the carbon has to come from you also. You have to give from yourself over as well. This is the idea. So on one hand, the Beis HaMikdash is there to inspire us, but it's not enough. It's not there just for us to do external acts. We have to connect the external act. The external acts have to be connected with the internal acts. It can't be zor. It has to be zer. It has to be a crown. And when the Jewish people said Naaseh Venishma, so the Malachim came and put down 2 crowns on them. Why? Because when they said Naaseh Venishma, they gave themselves over to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Okay.
If anyone has questions, please put them in the chat. There's a Beis Halevi about this, but is our initial statement of Naaseh Venishma what enabled the second set of luchos to last? It seems we didn't experience the thoroughly engraved luchos, which were destroyed. So is our commitment through and through from the statement we made more than the luchos?
Well, it was, how should we put it? It was the Naaseh Venishma was certainly the Naaseh Venishma is what gave the second luchos the ability to last. What was problematic was that the Jewish people were after having been they after having been avadim, after having been slaves and all that, their commitment was only as long as they saw a master, and their sense of God's presence was dependent upon Moshe Rabbeinu being there.
Yeah, according to the Gemara, what Alexander the Great saw the Big Day Kahuna in his dreams before a battle.
Yeah,
I mean the internal.
Shimon Tzadik. Yeah. Hello.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Was the real.
Go ahead. Yeah.
So it was the real Big Day Kahuna, not a costume.
That's right.
Okay. Any other questions? I don't see any in the chat right now.